Becca and Thomas met 3 years ago at a party at a mutual friend's house. Their meeting was like a scene from a romantic movie. They were both casually standing at the drinks counter when their gazes met. Becca, with her long brown hair and soft smile, immediately caught Thomas's attention. She was dressed in a light pastel-colored dress that emphasized her slim figure and thin waist. Her green eyes glowed with kindness and peace, which immediately attracted Thomas. Thomas, for his part, looked as if he had just stepped off the cover of a magazine. Tall, athletic, with short blonde hair and blue eyes, he was the epitome of masculinity. His self-confidence and easy, casual smile added to his charm. They exchanged a few phrases, but it was enough to create a spark between them that eventually grew into a deep affection. A few months after they met, Thomas asked Becca to move in with him. They rented a small, cozy apartment where their life resembled a romantic fairy tale. Thomas did everything to make Becca feel loved and protected. He often arranged surprises for her, romantic dinners, joint weekends out of town, or just unexpectedly brought her favorite flowers. When Thomas proposed, Becca didn't hesitate for a second. Their wedding was modest, but filled with warmth and love. Shortly after the wedding, they decided to buy a house. It was an old building with character, requiring a lot of effort to tidy up, but they saw it not just as a house, but as a symbol of their life together and their plans for the future. However, their ideal relationship began to undergo a change. Thomas was promoted at work, and his schedule became more demanding. He started staying out late, coming home tired and lacking the energy to fully socialize. Becca, on the one hand, understood that these were temporary difficulties, but on the other hand, she felt lonely. She continued studying, attending classes and doing her homework, but even that couldn't fill the void that was beginning to grow in her soul. Becca spent more and more time alone in their new home. Her days consisted of chores, studying, and waiting for Thomas to return from work in the evening. In her moments of loneliness, she often remembered how carefree and easy it had been at the beginning of their relationship. Her heart missed those times when every day was filled with attention and love. Even so, Becca tried to remain optimistic. She believed that their love would overcome all difficulties and they would be happy again, as before. But life had an unexpected twist in store for her that would change everything. Moving into a new house turned out to be not only a step into their future together, but also a challenge for Becca and Thomas. The house required a lot of work to repair and improve, and although Thomas wanted to take care of it personally, his job didn't leave him much time for it. Becca took on most of the responsibilities of fixing up the house and yard, which gave her the opportunity to get to know their new neighbor, Robert. Robert lived in the neighboring house, which was only a few steps across their shared fence. He was a middle-aged man, around 40, with short dark hair and a well-groomed beard that gave him a masculine appearance. His brown eyes, though somewhat troubled, radiated warmth and insight. He was in good physical shape, making him able to handle the hard work required by his home and business, which was directly across their driveway. Becca had first met Robert when he offered to help move furniture into their new home. Thomas was busy at work, and Becca couldn't refuse such a kind offer. Robert proved to be not only strong and skillful, but also a very pleasant conversationalist. He was witty, his jokes easily lightened the mood, and he was easy and relaxed to be with. During one of these visits, Robert mentioned that he had worked in the same field as Becca in the past, before he had to take over the family business after his father's death. It was an unexpected coincidence that piqued Becca's interest even more. Their conversations turned to professional topics, and Becca began to share her learning difficulties with him. One day, after a long day of studying and homework, Becca decided to text Robert with a study question. She thought it would be a one-time thing, but Robert not only responded quickly, but offered additional help. Their correspondence became more and more regular. At first, it was exclusively study questions, but soon they began to discuss personal topics, movies, music, books. It turned out that they had much more in common than Becca had imagined. Becca noticed that she was beginning to look forward to messages from Robert. In her moments of loneliness, his replies were like a breath of fresh air, a reminder that someone understood and supported her. Robert, despite his experience and age, knew how to listen and find the right words to lift his spirits. Thomas, of course, noticed Becca's frequent texting, but he didn't pay much attention to it. He trusted his wife and was confident in their relationship. However, Becca felt that something new, subtle, and dangerous was beginning to emerge between her and Thomas. One day when Thomas was at work, Robert stopped by their property to check on the progress of the renovations. They had a cup of coffee together in the backyard, and the conversation, which had begun with a discussion of the landscaping plans, turned again to personal topics. Robert told her how difficult it had been for him to make the decision to take over the business, giving up his profession, how it had worn him down. Becca understood him as well as anyone. In that moment, she felt that something more than friendship was emerging between them. Something irreversible was beginning to happen in Becca and Robert's relationship. The correspondence, which had begun as a friendly communication, gradually became filled with a hidden subtext. Robert, with his soft voice and manner of conversation, became more than just a neighbor to Becca. She began to notice how his presence made her heart beat faster, and his every message gave her an excitement she couldn't resist. One afternoon, when Thomas was late at work again, Becca decided to complete a few tasks around the house. The weather was hot outside, and she was working in the garden in a light t-shirt and shorts. Robert, seeing her over the fence, offered to help. Becca agreed with a smile. They started raking up old branches and leaves together, talking about nothing, but the atmosphere was tense. Her skin began to tingle with every casual touch from Robert, and she felt like the air between them was electrified. When the work was almost done, Robert suggested that Becca stop by his place for a glass of cold lemonade. Becca knew it was a bad idea, but she couldn't refuse. She justified it by saying that the heat and labor had tired her out, and a little chill wouldn't hurt. She followed him into his house, feeling the tension build with each step. Robert made lemonade and motioned for Becca to sit on the couch in the living room. The room was cozy, decorated in warm colors that made it feel cozy and protected. Becca sat down, and Robert sat next to her, closer than usual. They started talking, but this time, talking didn't bring relief. It was just an excuse to hide what they were both feeling. At one point, their gazes met, and a silence hung between them. Becca felt her heart begin to pound, and her breathing become ragged. Robert slowly reached out and brushed a strand of hair away from her face. His touch was soft and gentle. In that moment, Becca felt all the barriers she had put up for herself disappear. "We don't have to," Becca whispered softly, but her voice trembled traitorously. Robert, without a word, leaned closer to her. Their lips met in a gentle but insistent kiss. At first, Becca tried to push him away, but her resistance quickly dissolved into a growing desire. She felt herself losing control as the passion she had suppressed for so long flared up with renewed vigor. Robert pulled her against him, his arms wrapped around her waist, and she let herself drown in this moment. It was something she had sorely missed in her life, the feeling of having her passion and emotions recognized and shared. But deep inside, she knew she was making a mistake that could ruin everything she had. After a few minutes that seemed like an eternity, Becca pulled away abruptly. Panic gripped her, the realization of what she had done. "It was a mistake," she said, getting up and trying to clean herself up. Robert looked at her with regret and understanding, but said nothing. He knew words wouldn't change anything right now. Becca, without saying goodbye, jumped out of the house and ran to her room. Her thoughts were a mess, and her heart was racing with guilt and fear. She couldn't believe she had let herself get this far. As she walked back to her house, she felt reality come crashing back down on her. Her hands were shaking, and she could barely hold back the tears. When Thomas returned home, Becca tried to look as normal as possible, but her eyes betrayed her inner state. She knew she had to stop any contact with Robert, but it was harder than she thought. The attachment that had developed between them was stronger than she would have liked to admit. Now, every encounter with him reminded her of what had happened and the boundary she had crossed. After that fateful day, Becca tried to act as if nothing had happened. She stopped corresponding with Robert and avoided him, trying to keep out of his sight. However, the guilt never left her. Every time she saw Thomas, her heart shrank with the realization that she had betrayed his trust. She tried to return to her normal life, but thoughts of what had happened would not let her go. Thomas was busy at work as usual and didn't notice the change in Becca's behavior, but she knew it wouldn't last long. She became more nervous, disturbed by the slightest sounds and chance encounters with Robert. Every time she passed his house, she felt her heart start to beat faster. She was afraid he would come out to meet her and speak to her. But Robert seemed to understand her condition and kept his distance, not trying to renew contact. Becca tried to forget herself in her routine. She was busy at home, studying, trying to fill her time so that there was no room for unnecessary thoughts. But every encounter with Thomas, his touch, his questions about her day, reminded her that she was hiding the truth from him. Her lies were becoming a burden she couldn't shake off. One evening, when Thomas returned from work, he noticed Becca looking tired and depressed. He walked over to her, put his arm around her, and suggested that they spend the evening together as they had done before. Becca, feeling his warmth, almost cried with guilt. She agreed, but all evening she was tormented by the realization that she could no longer be completely honest with him. Over dinner, Thomas began to talk about his plans for the weekend. He wanted to go to the countryside to get away from the hustle and bustle of the city and spend time with Becca. But she, absorbed in her own thoughts, barely listened to him. Her mind was focused on how she could hide what had happened from him. That same night when they went to bed, Thomas tried to start a conversation about noticing a change in her mood. He asked her if something was wrong. Becca, feeling panic overwhelm her, could barely hold back her tears. She lied, saying she was just tired from studying and housework. Thomas seemed to accept her explanation, but his eyes betrayed worry. The next day, while Thomas was at work, Becca decided to go outside to take her mind off her thoughts. She decided to take a walk around the neighborhood, hoping that the fresh air would help her calm down. However, as she walked down the path along the houses, she suddenly saw Robert coming out of his house. Their gazes met, and Becca felt the very feeling she had been trying to suppress flare up inside her again. Robert approached her slowly, his gaze full of regret and understanding. He was the first to break the silence, saying that he hadn't meant for things to go this far. Becca, trying to keep her distance, only nodded, not knowing what to say. Robert apologized for what had happened, saying that he understood how hard it was for her. He offered to put it all behind her and never bring it up again. Becca agreed, but her voice trembled. She realized that there would always be more than just friendship between them now, even if they never spoke of it again. She tried to end the conversation as soon as possible and go home, but her thoughts were a mess. In the evening when Thomas returned, he tried again to figure out what was going on with Becca. He suggested a romantic dinner to take her mind off her daily routine. Becca, trying to suppress her emotions, agreed. They spent the evening together as they had before, but anxiety was building in Becca's heart. She felt she couldn't hide the truth for long, but the fear of losing Thomas held her back. Becca could no longer hide her guilt from Thomas. Her condition was getting worse by the day, and the guilt was eating her up inside. She knew she could no longer live a lie, and that a confession was inevitable, even if it destroyed everything they had. That evening, when Thomas returned from work, he noticed her unusual behavior. She was brooding, avoided his gaze, and seemed lost. At dinner, he tried again to find out what was bothering her, but Becca only nodded and smiled a strained smile. When they went to bed, Thomas asked cautiously, "Becca, what's going on? I feel like you're not with me. Is something wrong?" Her heart beat faster, and she realized the moment had arrived. She sat down on the edge of the bed and took a deep breath. "Thomas," she began, her voice trembling, "there's something I have to tell you. It's hard, but I can't hide it any longer." Thomas tensed, feeling like his world was about to crumble. Becca told him about what had happened between her and Robert. Tears streamed down her face as she tried to explain how she'd gotten to this point, how feelings of loneliness and uncertainty had pushed her to take this step. She confessed everything, realizing that everything now depended on Thomas being able to forgive her. Thomas remained silent for a long time. His face remained impassive, but Becca could see the pain and disappointment in his eyes. Finally, he spoke. "I can't believe you did this, but I can't believe even more that you found the strength to admit it. It's hard, really hard. I love you, but I don't know if I can get over it. Becca felt her heart break. She realized that she had lost the most important thing in her life. She was ready for Thomas to leave and her inner world to shatter completely. But then something unexpected happened. Thomas took a deep breath, sat down on the bed next to Becca, and quietly said, "I don't know if I can forgive you right now, but I do know that I don't want to lose us. I don't want this incident to ruin what we've built together. We need time to think things through, but I'm willing to try to understand what happened and maybe start over." Becca couldn't believe her ears. She thought this was the end, that she would lose Thomas forever, but his words gave her hope. He didn't walk away, didn't break things off all at once. He suggested they try to keep what they had despite all the pain and disappointment. In the following weeks, their relationship was put to a serious test. They talked a lot, fought sometimes, but tried to find common ground. Thomas decided that they needed to spend more time together, to work more on their relationship. Becca was willing to do anything to prove her devotion and love. One evening as they sat together on the veranda, Thomas suddenly said, "I think we need to get away for a while. Away from this place, away from everything that reminds us of what happened. Let's start with a clean slate." Becca looked at him in surprise, and then nodded. They decided to sell the house and move to another town where no one knew their story. It wasn't an easy decision, but they both felt it was the only way to keep their love alive. The move was a new beginning for them. They put their mistakes behind them and tried to build a new life based on trust and mutual support. It was not easy, but every day they grew closer to each other, learned to forgive and trust again.